Strange phenomenon occurred in the city of Melbourne, Australia. Hundreds of people suffered asthma attacks during a storm. All this happened Monday night, November 21, 2016. On Monday evening, residents of the city of Melbourne in southeastern Australia were buffeted by an intense storm. But for some, the damage was far beyond the collapse of several structures and fallen trees. The reason? Severe asthma attacks that generated more than 1,800 calls to emergency services between 6 p.m. and 11 p.m. local time, 6 times more than those received regularly in the same period of time. At some point, a call was recorded every 4 or 5 seconds, said Jill Hennessy, Health Minister of Victoria, the state that is Melbourne. In Edito, according to Mick Stevenson, Director of Ambulance Victoria, the department that coordinates services for emergency transportation in Melbourne, what happened in the town around what is known as the asthma thunderstorms was unusual without above. Most of the callers reported having difficulty breathing, chest pain and wheezing, high-pitched sound that occurs when the bronchi constrict and the air passes through the airways, said Stevenson. He added that the symptoms of asthma sufferers were exacerbated, but we also saw cases of people who had asthma attacks for the first time in his life. Robin Old, Director of Asthma Victoria, an organization dedicated to the management of this disease, also coincided with respect to the rarity of the phenomenon. The count of pollen particles that occurred that day was 102, more than twice what is recorded on a regular day, said Old to the BBC. The ability of medical services for the emergency reached its limit. A spokesman for the Royal Children's Hospital, for example, reported that in a 24-hour period attended 500 cases of respiratory problems, which is extraordinary for the hospital. Unusual but not unique. Authorities confirmed the death of 2 people behind the phenomenon. It is suspected to be linked to the storm, so that local authorities have launched an investigation. Local and international media have reported that 2 other people died in similar circumstances and that there are several patients who are in intensive care. A study by the Department of Respiratory Diseases of Naples in Italy reports that there have been similar to that of Melbourne in cities in the UK, Italy, and the United States cases. Old explains that in the southeast of Australia is usually high humidity at this time of year, generating electrical activity in the storms quite often. According to scientists at the Society of Clinical Immunology and Allergy Australasia, the asthma thunderstorms. It happens when it rains. The pollen absorbs water and is divided into hundreds of tiny particles that are easily inhaled. During a storm, the water enters the pollen faster, accelerating its breakdown. This increases the levels of pollen in the atmosphere. And when this strong winds characteristic of these climatic phenomena are added, the particles have greater reach. This is what initiates an allergic reaction that causes asthma attacks. People who already have this condition are much more susceptible than others. So are those who suffer from allergic rhinitis to pollen. But many comments on social networks in that country are not satisfied with what mentioned by the scientific authorities on this phenomenon. They say that this time was much more people who suffered from these asthma attacks, and even many who had never had symptoms asthma had an attack that day, which is quite rare.